Okay, today class we're going to talk about some very important presidential powers and go through some vocabulary. Make sure you're taking notes as we go through this PowerPoint. It's short, it's only 4 slides, but it's all very important information you need to know. First thing we will talk about is the presidential power of the executive order. Presidents can issue executive orders. They have the power of law, but they are not usually about things unrelated to already existing laws. Or said another way, presidents usually issue executive orders that relate specifically to how a government agency should implement a law already created by the Congress, or executive orders dealing directly with constitutional presidential powers. For example, executive orders dealing with the military. President Eisenhower famously desegregated the military through an executive order. That's an example of the second kind. Other executive orders deal with how the CIA operates, or how the EPA, for example, would implement the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act. Another area is executive privilege. This is mentioned in the Constitution. Conversations with the president are privileged and confidential, as long as they're about official government matters. So much like a doctor-patient privilege or an attorney-client privilege, conversations with the president cannot be divulged in court. There's a couple of examples I have listed here. One is the Supreme Court case U.S. v. Nixon from 1973. This is when President Nixon was deep into the Watergate scandal and claimed executive privilege to block Congress from getting access to materials that may have been incriminating. The Supreme Court ruled against Nixon, ruling that executive privilege, while it does protect conversations with the president, is not designed to cover up criminal actions. Another example, much more recent, is shortly after 2000, President Bush and Vice President Cheney convened an energy task force to come up with ideas to improve America's, the federal government's energy policy. And a lot of people who were opponents of this demanded a list of people who were involved in the task force, and because the conversations and the meetings they had as part of the task force were all in secret, and the courts ruled that Vice President Cheney did not have to tell anybody who was involved in the conversations. Okay, on foreign policy, we all know that the president has the power to write treaties. Something to keep in mind, we have a little bit of a backwards process here in the United States where the president, in a sense, makes the agreement with the foreign nation and then has to go back and get permission from the Senate, which often causes some conflict with the president and the Senate. A couple of famous examples are the Treaty of Versailles of 1919. President Wilson practically wrote the thing and basically signed it and was promoting it, and then brought it back to the United States, and the United States Senate told him to go fly a kite because they were not interested in participating in the League of Nations. He was so worked up about it, he went on a nationwide tour trying to get the American public in favor of it, using a train, going city to city, giving speeches about it, and exhausted himself to the point where he actually had a stroke and was incapacitated for the rest of his presidency. But the Senate never ratified the treaty. More recent treaties not ratified by the Senate would include the Kyoto Protocol, that is an environmental treaty that deals with fossil fuel emissions. The United States has never signed that. An executive agreement is similar to a treaty, is basically what you get when the president makes an agreement with a foreign country but then doesn't get the Senate's confirmation or approval. Sometimes presidents feel like they need to go to this when they're not getting anything else accomplished. Okay, a couple more points here. Obviously, we all know about the presidential veto. It can be overridden by 2/3 majority in the House and in the Senate. We have not had very many vetoes recently. We've had even fewer veto overrides by presidents recently. The pocket veto is one when the Congress goes out of session. If within that 10 days, Congress, that the president has to sign the bill, if the Congress goes out of session and he doesn't sign it, then the bill dies. These are used probably about 1/3 of the time. by presidents. About a third of the vetoes are pocket vetoes. And then a little historical note, there was a time period in the 90s when President Clinton had the line item vetoes. Law was written by Congress, and they approved the power. Then later on, New York State, I think it was New York City, sued to challenge it because they said it was an unconstitutional power because the line item veto was used to block money that was going to New York City. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of New York. So the President of the United States today does not have the line item veto. It was deemed unconstitutional, and we obviously require at this point a constitutional amendment to give the President that power. Many governors have line item vetoes, mostly because most governors are required to have a balanced budget, unlike the federal government, which does not require a balanced budget. Okay, last but not least, we have pardons and amnesty. Pardons are when the President can pardon anyone for a federal crime. Basically, you can be pardoned at any point. You can be pardoned after you've served in prison, for example, or paid a fine, or even before. And basically, it's like your record has been cleared, and then in the future, if you ever commit a crime, it would be like a first offense. You can be pardoned for a specific crime, or you can be pardoned for all crimes you've been committed. Amnesty is more like a group pardon. For example, President Carter granted amnesty to all Americans who are guilty of avoiding the draft during the Vietnam War. He did this after the Vietnam War was over because there was many Americans hiding in Canada, not coming back because they thought they would be prosecuted for dodging the draft. And he granted an amnesty for all those Americans.